Okay, everyone. Just occurred to me that one of the things we've got to watch out for here. This thing is so close to the kind of workflow of traditional watercolor that we really do have to apply the same rules. It's actually quite incredible. Once you really get into this, it's amazing just how similar things are. Um, in regard to that, what we've got to be very careful of, or very mindful of, is the wet state of both the washes and the paper, the washes and the canvas. Um, as you already know, we see the wet state via the little show wet button there. What I'm going to do at this stage is completely dry everything. Okay, dry both the paper and the existing washes, if you like. Look, here's an example. Let's begin by choosing that colour. Now I'm just using the first brush in the list here. This is version 7, by the way. You can see all my size, all my settings for the brush there. Okay, let's begin with this colour. One of the things we have to bear in mind when we're working in traditional watercolour is when we place one wash next to another, we have to be mindful of the wet state of the first wash. Okay, and that's exactly the same in this software. If I show wet now, we'll see that this wash is thoroughly wet. Everything around it is dry. Okay, if I now take another colour using the same brush at the same settings, okay, and I lay an area of wash next to this, look what happens once I can start the thing diffusing. There we go. Can you see this second wash running up into the first? In fact, it's run up into the first to the extent that it's filled that first wash. Okay, now this is a significant difference. Let's just try that again. I'm going to apply less colour this time. Okay, so there's wash number 1 in that colour. Okay, and we'll quickly go to the other colour and we'll lay down wash number 2. Okay, like so. Because I've used less colour this time, the washes, if you like, are mingling more, whereas before this one went up into this first wash and filled its entirety. This time we're losing that edge a little more. Again, if we do this really quickly, first wash, okay, second wash, like so, and we'll let that go. Once again, now look at the gradation we've got. So in reality, the time left in between laying the first wash and laying the second is an important factor, because if I do this quickly, 1, okay, 2, like so, and let things diffuse, then those washes mingle very well. They diffuse into one another very nicely indeed. Conversely, even if I take this wash, okay, like so, and we wait a little while until that's stopped diffusing, okay, and then I take this wash and place it next to the first one, okay, like so, and we let that diffuse. Okay, we've got one wash mingling into the other, but we've still got that clear edge there. Now of course we can go in with the blender and get rid of that edge, but remember, so far what we've been doing is we've been applying wet washes on dry paper. Okay, more importantly, we've been applying one wash, okay, leaving that wash wet and then applying another wash next to it. Okay, let's look at the difference now. What we're going to do now is similar to what we do, in fact identical to what we do in traditional watercolor. Rather than placing two washes side by side while the first wash is still wet, so we get that diffusion from one wash into another, what we're going to do this time is place the first wash, okay, like so, okay, and we'll let that diffuse. Okay, if I go to show wet, okay, we can clearly see that that's still wet. In reality, it's still diffusing because this shade of blue is getting lighter. So we'll let that get on with that for a couple of minutes. Okay, we can afford to stop it there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to dry this paper. So by hitting this dry the layer button, okay, click that, everything's dry. The paper's dry and this first wash is dry. If we come out of this and we go for our second colour, this time we'll apply a wash next to that first one, okay, and let that diffuse. Look at the difference, okay, here, because we were wet into wet, we've got this lovely diffusion and this lost edge, to a certain degree lost edge in all of these. In this one we've got this clear sharp edge between these two washes. More importantly, this second wash, where it does cross over into the first wash a little, is far more opaque. So what this tells us is, if we want to place two washes, two areas of different tone washes, different colour washes next to one another, and we want a clear division between those two washes, what we need to do is place the first one. Okay, remember at that stage that's going to be wet. We need to dry the layer then, okay, and then place the second wash like so, and let that diffuse, and then we'll maintain that lovely crisp edge between the two. If that's not what we want to do, if we want to do the opposite of that, we would lay the first wash like so, okay, start that diffusing, go to the second colour and lay the second wash in there. Then we get this lovely sense of diffusion between those two washes. Now, the difference between this approach and this approach is critical when it comes to achieving effects in traditional watercolour. You know, this essentially is what it's all built around. And the same applies in terms of the paper. Currently, even though we've got a couple of areas of wet washes here, the paper surrounding those washes is still dry. Okay, so that clearly means that if I let's for instance go to water here, okay, if I go to the water tool and we have maximum water there, in fact let's turn that down a little, okay, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to add some water around the edge of that wash. Okay, now look at the effect there. What's happening there is that this water is actually running within the wash. Okay, we can see that water sort of diffusing within this area of wash. Why is it doing that? Because essentially that's the easiest way for it to go. This area of wash is wet, this is water, this white stuff is dry, so naturally when we drop water on this, it's going to run into that existing wet wash, because it's easier for it to do that than try and run out into this dry paper. Once again, conversely, if we wet this entire paper like so, okay, now the washes are wet and the paper surrounding it is wet. If I now go in with water here, something completely different is going to happen. Okay, it's going to push, you can see it there, it's going to push outwards as well as into the existing wash. okay, because the paper surrounding it is now wet. So if you like, it's the water's not captive, it's not trapped within that area of wash. Let's take the blend tool here, okay, and we'll just reduce that edge a little, like so. This is so useful, you see, because just by using these controls, just by using the difference between wet and dry, we can create so many different watercolor effects, and we can control how one wash interacts with another in so many different ways. So controlling the wet state here is crucial. If at this stage I now go and dry the whole layer, okay, so once again everything's dry, and I go back to that brush, anything I paint here, any wash I lay down at this stage, is going to physically sit on top of those existing washes because they're dry and the paper around them is dry. Okay, so it's a hugely complex and yet hugely natural way of using watercolor. Every time I pick this thing up and work a little more with it, I see more and more complexity here. It really is incredible stuff. Now, of course, at the same time, what we've been looking at here only applies when we're working on a single layer, or rather when we're applying the individual washes to the same layer, okay? Because if I add another layer here, and even if I completely wet that layer, okay, like so, it's still a blank layer, but it's wet. So what's going to happen is, when I come in here with some colour, okay, the colour is going to flow on that layer, but regardless of any wet settings, it's not going to interact with that layer beneath at all. So once again, at this stage, we've got this wonderful opportunity to isolate one wash from another by having it on another layer. Okay, because we haven't got this sense of, if you like, pick up underlying colour. Even if I go back to this layer here and I wet that entirely, okay, and we'll go back to this layer and turn that wet preview off. Even now, working on this second layer, if I lay another wash here, okay, both layers are wet, and I let that diffuse, I've still got no interaction between the washes on this layer and the washes on the layer beneath. So that's a wonderfully effective way of layering washes, of isolating one wash from another. We can do it either via the wet and dry mechanism. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat this morning. We can do that either via the wet and dry mechanism on the current layer, or we can add another layer. And of course, once we do that, we've got so many possibilities here, because then we can use blending modes. I mean, I've been experimenting with this, and blending modes work beautifully with watercolor here, particularly if we leave washes wet. Okay, let's get that to diffuse. You can see now, even though we're working with a blending mode on this layer, we're still getting that same diffusion between the washes on the same layer, but we're getting that together with the current layer blending mode, and it works every time, and it works beautifully. I'll show you another little bit here. One of the things I love is the eraser. The more you work with this tool, the more you see just how valuable it is. Again, very little pressure. We've got the softness turned right down, and what this is going to do when I use very little pressure on the brush is reveal that paper grain. Okay, now currently I've only got the default papers available here. I haven't installed my own custom papers yet, but you'll see the potential here. If we were to use pattern papers and that kind of thing, you know, we've got the potential to reveal these various different patterns within washes. You only need change the paper for the amount of time you're working on the wash. You know, we can then sort of revert back to the original paper, so we've got that in the background, and we've got that for subsequent washes. But we've imparted this wonderful texture within this wash, and then of course we can go on to blend. The fantastic thing about this is, you know, that the layer blending modes make no difference at all to how we can use any of the tools in other programs. You know, certainly in terms of watercolor, we struggle to use different tools in conjunction with layers in various blend modes. That's not the case at all here. So this is fabulous. Starting to look more at the smear tool. That can be an incredibly useful thing, because we can almost kind of liquefy washes, and I mean liquefy as in terms of the liquefy brushes and liquefy filters. We can move these things around. You know, we can extend washes, we can shift them. So once a wash is laid down, we can sort of push that around to, in effect, if you like, shape the wash. And that's a hugely powerful thing. That's at high pressure. Okay, and we can literally push this stuff around. If I come back to this layer, you know, if I want to reshape this wash, all I've got to do is take that smear tool and push that around, and then once again we can go in with the water here on this layer, and we can let some water gently into that wash. Currently I've got the whole layer is wet, so it's going to migrate outside of that wash. But if I dry this, okay, then we're going to be able to restrict the flow of that water more. Hugely powerful stuff. I mean, this is so inspiring, and we've barely sort of scraped the surface, no pun intended, of this yet. But genuinely, this is by far the closest thing to traditional watercolor, and feeling as if I'm working with traditional watercolor that I've ever known. You know, there's so much potential here for creating myriad different effects. It's thrilling stuff. Anyway, hope that's useful. Okay, speak to you soon. Bye bye.